saying apartment in a 40 block complex. People are thinking red flags, red flag. What is this guy doing? Sean, mate, how you been? A couple of weeks since we last spoke about that last deal.
Very well, mate. Very well. Thanks for jumping back on today.
Yeah, of course, mate. I heard you got a juicy little deal since we last spoke, right?
You know what they say, if you're not growing, you're dying. So I think
Yeah.
as a property investor, we're always on the hunt, waiting for that next one to pop up, and somewhat patience is king, I guess.
Can you tell us a little bit about the property and the deal? And we'll
Yeah,
talk.
yeah. So it's this
Yep.
one in Cairns North. It's a two-bed, two-bath apartment set in a complex of about 40 odd units, right near the Cairns Esplanade, one block back from the Cairns Esplanade, and not far from the Cairns Hospital and Cairns CBD. Is a sort of a bit of a high-level overview of the property itself.
What drew you to, I guess, we'll go into it in more detail, but what drew you to Cairns North with that apartment? Because you're saying apartment in a 40 block complex, people are thinking red flags, red flag, what is this guy doing? But did you want to quickly speak to it very quickly and then we'll get into it properly?
Yeah, I think to start as a high level and talk to Cairns North as a suburb and to its merits. First of all, there's a lot happening in that space. So, for instance, the hospital's doing a massive upgrade there. They're building a university hospital campus just next door, and that's literally 500 meters up the road from this complex. It's a landlocked suburb as well. So, if you're not familiar with Cairns, but essentially Cairns has a mountain range that runs through the back of it. And as you work up to the north, up to Palm Cove, the mountains basically hit the ocean. And then the only growth opportunity for Cairns as far as more property goes is to the south. So I think those sort of inner CBD properties, they're always been something that's been appealing to me.
Let's talk about, a little bit about the suburb and talk about the property. So people can see why it is actually a really great deal. They're just, like I said, they hear a property, like it's a unit in a massive complex. They think, what is this guy doing? But I think once we talk about it, they'll see why maybe this is a strategy that some people can consider, especially if you're on an average to low income, right? Not everyone can buy those juicy 800, 900K $1 million properties, be out of pocket, 30 grand a year. This
And
is
I
might
think
be
that provides some good context. So, like, just to frame up the conversation, this property wasn't seven, eight, 900,000. We essentially picked it up for 420. So
anyway.
I think last week we joked about a new car. This is probably a second-hand car gets you the deposit for this one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely perfect. Well, let's get into it a little bit. What I'll do, Sean, if you want, is I'll share my screen about the data very quickly.
Yeah, let's
For
jump into the data.
now, going into the data here, this is again, Sean, one of the tools that we use. It's called hashtag higher than average growth. Now, depending on the tools that you use, and obviously the data that spits out, you're looking at capital growth, as you can see from here, at around 6% per annum. Now, other tools might say 4 or 5. So even if you average it out, you're looking at about 5% per annum growth, right? Potentially if you hold this property for 10 years or more. So when you just say that, might not be like, oh, what's going on here? But if you, like you said, you go deeper into the suburb of Cairns North, you understand there's actually a lot of work going into it.
And like especially look at like the 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year growth. We've pretty much been sitting at like 10% growth for apartments in Cairns North over the last sort of 5 years. And so while like the long-term data, look, there probably is sexier suburbs. When you look at the short term, there's a number of reasons why we've seen that sort of short-term growth. And I think that's like a pretty good indicator of what I'm seeing on the ground. And I think that's going to hold momentum for the next couple of years ahead anyway.
But also, like you mentioned, Cairns does have the Cairns Esplanade, and Cairns North and Spall specifically has the hospital there with that massive project. Like you said, I think it's going to be $250 million, which will provide lots of job during constructions, extra beds, and things like that. So that'd be really good to look at as well.
I think that's like a good segue too, like looking at the developments that are happening in the area. And we're chatting earlier, and I think one of my favorite tools, and I'm not alone on this front, is ChatGPT. I've been using it for absolutely everything at the moment. And it's a great like starting point, I think, ChatGPT to jump in and look at data and look at like areas. And this is I've thrown into ChatGPT asking about the Cairns developments, and it spat me out a pretty comprehensive list. So I think if someone is looking at researching those first steps and like the first little bit of an area, if they're not really familiar with it, ChatGPT can be a great resource. So this talks about the Cairns Hospital upgrades, $250 million, the university hospital transformation. So essentially they're building another building opposite the hospital that's going to become like a university hospital to train doctors. It also talks about the Cairns Navy development. And that's one of a big sort of employer in Cairns that's often overlooked is we do have quite a big Navy base here, and they are expanding that with a number of sort of large developments in that port at the moment. So that's sort of a bit of an overview of some of the bigger projects happening in Cairns at the moment. And I think it just sort of is a good little insight there if people haven't been using ChatGPT in this way, is to start considering like how they can use it for their property research.
This is another tool that we use called Suburbs Finder, which can be quite expensive, and it's more, I guess, look for savvy investors and obviously buyers agents like us.
There's a
And
reason we pay you guys the big bucks.
yep, absolutely. But this basically speaks to what ChatGPT said, right? About the key infrastructure going into the areas. And for example, highlighting this one here, the Cairns Hospital expansion here, which is $250 million. And it talks about when it starts, when it's going to end, the amount of jobs during construction, and what the actual impact's going to be in the local
Interesting
area.
there looking at like that jobs data as well.
Absolutely. So it is really massive, and you can see a lot of infrastructure, right? These are ones that are planning, been approved, underway. So this isn't just pie in the sky. This is things that are happening and really being considered by council to go through. And it's really good to see that as well, because it gives us more confidence in the area and how council, but also the actual government, the Queensland government, is injecting so much capital into Cairns and hundreds of millions, if not over $1 billion, into that region.
And yeah, they're not doing that for shits and giggles, are they? Like they've obviously
No,
got
definitely not.
the census data, they've got the stats there to
Absolutely.
know where to be throwing the cash.
Absolutely. It's a medium-sized economy, right? So it's really crucial that they keep it pumping, especially from a tourism perspective, but also people living there.
So I guess it comes down to like why this particular property as well. Like you alluded to it, the bigger complexes, it does have a bit of a stigma. Very much in that investment space, we talk about like boutique complexes, five, six, seven. As soon as we get to like that number of 40, people often like really start to shy away. But I think it also like for me, it depends on the area, currently like the development costs, so on and so forth. So to jump into the big ones for why we've thought this property was appealing for us. Firstly, you might have heard of people in the past like talk about the ripple effect, where you've got like a real high-end suburb and then like prices work their way down and like those lower demographic suburbs get risen up just because they become appealing from a price point. And at the moment, I think there's signs in Cairns that we're almost seeing like the reverse of the ripple effect. You look at this property and we picked it up for 420, and it's in like a really desirable location, desirable complex. But then we go to what was traditionally like second tier suburbs like Menora and Menunda, and properties are selling for like almost the same price. If not, like some properties are selling for more in those like B grade suburbs. And for me, it's just like possibly a sign that those lower end suburbs are just becoming maybe a little bit overpriced, or maybe Cairns North is underpriced. And I'm sort of betting on the fact that Cairns North is underpriced by buying this property. And I think we'll see money start to move back that way, almost like I say, the reverse to the ripple.
This property's got dual zoning, which helps from a short-term rentals perspective, right? So the council can't shut you down.
Absolutely. That was a big one for us. So we bought this property with the forefront of our mind was we wanted to be able to generate cash flow from it, and we wanted to have it on the short-term rental market. So that was one of our key criteria. And having this property dual zoned, so you can live in it long-term and you can legally short-term rental it. And that means that the council can't come along if the neighbour complains that the guests were rowdy for some reason. The council can't come along and shut it down. It's a much harder process, near impossible, basically, because of that zoning.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned as well, right? The cash flow, right? It's basically neutral, if not positive, and we'll go into the numbers. But yeah, that's what the key thing is, right? Because 5% capital growth doesn't sound like a lot, but when we look at the cash flow, you can also get alongside that. It does make it a really juicy deal.
Absolutely, it makes it a juicy deal. The other big thing that I've been like a firm believer in a very long time about is like the replacement cost. So I think when you're like buying properties like substantially below replacement cost, it creates a moat or a barrier to entry to like new supply coming into the market. So like earlier, I was looking at my good old friend ChatGPT and just sort of looking at what like current development costs are. And for a complex of that size, you're currently looking at like 3,500 to 4,500 per square meter to replicate it. And that doesn't take into account like land value. It doesn't take into account like the developer's profit margin. So you look at like this unit and it was 117 square meters. If we call it like 4,000 per meter, what did I work out? It worked out to be 468,000 to replicate this unit. And that's not taking into account land or developers' profits. So that creates like a pretty serious moat to like new developers coming in and just flooding the market with units. Essentially, just the prices aren't there. And for me, I think, we've got to see these unit prices go up another 50% until we see the market flooded with new builds.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you said, right, it's a very established suburb, so it can be very difficult to do that as well right now.
Yeah, correct. There's like next to no land supply, so you're going to be paying a premium for land to knock something down. And it just creates, yeah, a bit of a moat. And for me, it was one of the big reasons we were drawn to that complex is because I know that there's not going to be another 20 units next door to it built all having 100 units in each complex.
And yeah, Sean, as we were saying, right, like this isn't an investment that you want to do as a long-term rental. It just doesn't make sense from a capital growth perspective, but also from a cash flow. And I think that this is a perfect segue for us to go into the calculator. As you can see, right, we're looking at a 420K purchase price. Weekly rent, right, for a property like that, you're looking at maybe 580 per week. And then from a management fee perspective, you're looking at 6.5%. And then we've got mortgage repayments, insurance, strata, which is massive, and then council and water. Now, you take all that into consideration, you're negative almost $9,000 a year.
It's funny when we were doing up this and like looking at these numbers, I just sort of had that like I've never been one to like invest in these super negatively geared properties. And it just sort of made me like boggle my mind the fact that, there's are people buying $2 million investment properties that are losing like 30, 40, 50 grand a year and just like the impact that has on like someone's lifestyle if they're on like a modest income.
No, absolutely. And look, for example, a property like this, you might be looking also, because people say, I'm doing it negative because I want that capital growth. Well, at a property like this, you may be looking at about 26,000, 27,000 per annum in capital growth if you're, holding a long term, a 5% per annum, right?
Yeah.
But then if you discount, if you take this fee and minus that, you're then only looking at maybe 16 grand total growth, net in terms of cash position. So it doesn't
Becomes
really
a
help.
pretty narrow margin. Like yeah, it is interesting. But yeah, it was certainly something that sort of crossed my mind is that like how important the capital growth is when you're like looking at these highly negatively geared properties. And at 9 grand, this isn't too bad, $200 a week after tax. You might be looking at sort of a $500,000 cost in your pocket each year, which isn't too bad at all compared to certain properties. But it's that looking at the whole picture, it's the growth plus the yield.
And you look, you're right, Sean. From a out of pocket perspective, it's not a lot being $9,000 a year. Like obviously to some it might seem like a lot, but in the grand scheme of, we've seen investors be out of pocket 30 grand a year, 20 grand, 40 grand, a lot more. But even for like the average person, like 9 grand is still a lot. And if you're only gaining equity of maybe $26,000 per annum, that just eats away from that growth, right? And you just can't have that. So then you're not growing your portfolio. But if you frame your thinking a little bit different and you look at it from a short-term rental perspective, you might be positively geared, which we'll go into,
And
and from there you have that capital growth as well.
And that's exactly the lens we were looking at it. We knew that Cairns is a really vibrant short-term market and does exceedingly well. Like having a look at AirDNA, so this is sort of Cairns North. These properties through this little pocket that I've highlighted are all really comparable properties. Um, that whole area, it's sort of very much one and the same. And we can look and see like the average revenue through there is 71,000 a year. Average daily rates is around $326 and your 72% occupancy. So that's like a really healthy market through there, especially when you overlay it and look at like the purchase prices. So, you're only spending sort of 420, which we will break down and go into the numbers further. But on a high level, certainly these yields start to look pretty favorable.
I think that's a perfect segue as well, Sean, into looking at the calculator now for the short-term rental.
Let's do it. Let's jump
Uh,
into it.
Before we do that as well, let me share my screen here. Can you see this?
Yep.
So remember, guys, this is what we have here, negative $8,997. Now going into the short-term rental, it's a whole different beast, and that's positive.
So yeah, this is
Sure.
like where when we're looking at this calculator, we've got like the purchase price. We're taking into account that the property is not going to be occupied, 365 days of the year. We're working on 85% occupancy, working off 280 as an average nightly rate, which I think we might even be able to get a smidge more than that. And then we've obviously got our outgoings there as well. So after all said and done, after we're paying the interest, paying for the maintenance, paying for the insurance, the strata, the council, you're left with that 13,000 in your pocket, and that's paying full management fees. So, that's paying a manager, keeping it as a passive investment so that you're not doing any more work than you would on like a long-term tenancy.
Absolutely. And I wanted to quickly highlight as well with the calculations. So this says 430 here. Per property purchase price was 420, but I've included the furnishing costs.
That's
Uh,
probably a great segue. Let me jump in and share
yeah,
my screen for a second there, Aaron.
stop sharing. Go for it.
So, like talking to furnishings, this is something, people can balk and go, oh, it's going to cost me 20, 30, $40,000 to furnish a property. We've been doing this for a little while now, and pretty much got it down to a fine art of Facebook Marketplace. And this was a property in the same complex, actually, that we did for a client. So this property is actually generating around 100K per annum, sitting at 95% occupancy, $330 as an average daily rate. So this sort of gives you an idea of like actual figures that this property is earning. And this property cost us around 10 grand to furnish. So we did this through like Facebook Marketplace furniture, which you can save a fortune, certainly on like dining tables, beds, couches, those sort of items. And you can also like speed up the process. At the moment, I don't know when the last time anyone tried to like buy a couch from like Harvey Norman was, but sometimes it can take like 3 months for something to get here. So if you've got a 30-day settlement and you're trying to get the property ready to go so it's not sitting there vacant, Facebook Marketplace is definitely the place to go to like load up on quality furnishings, get it done cheap, and you can do like a two-bed, two-bath apartment for 10 grand without any real stretch.
And I love how you framed it there, Sean. Like it's a nice little insight into like Facebook Marketplace gives you the speed and the price, but it's quality furniture still. You're not going for
Yep.
cheap, but you're going for quality, but affordable. So you're still
Yep.
getting the right ones that match the property and look great, but you're getting it for a much more discounted price because it's been used.
And I think the speed element is that also important. Like if you're waiting for, if the property's all ready to go, you're paying all those outgoings and you're waiting 2 months for a couch to arrive from Super Amart, that ends up being a pretty expensive couch if you're looking at like $2,000 a week in lost income.
Oh no, absolutely. And very quickly as well, going back into the calculator, Sean, so everyone can just see it again, what it looks like. This is what you're looking at, right? So the 10K cost has been included here. And then for the mortgage repayments, because obviously the purchase price is 420, we based it on that 20% deposit and interest only repayments of 6.47% interest rate. So that's why these repayments are roughly at this figure here. So looking at it
Correct.
that way, right? Instead of it being negative, let's say $9,000, it's positive now 13,600. So now you're not taking that 9,000 away from the $26,000 capital growth, but you're adding the 13,600 to the $26,000 capital growth. So it does then become a much more powerful tool for you. Look, as we talked about, right? Like it's not the best market to invest in terms of a long-term rental side of things, right? Traditional investing may not be the way to go about it with Cairns North. However, if you're open to taking a little bit of risk with your short-term rental, because look, it's not guaranteed income, but there is that opportunity to get that massive upside, then you could potentially be way better off, as we saw, right? 13,600 positive versus 9,000 negative.
And
So
I think that's the big thing for, that's why I like the market is, you can get into it at like at a really affordable price point, like 420. You could get in with a 10% deposit, 40 grand. That's like, that feels achievable. Like as someone, if someone's starting out, I feel that's like a really achievable stepping stone. And then if you're buying it as a short-term rental, you're then, earning $200 a week income from it as well. So you're not sacrificing your lifestyle. And I think as property investors, it's easy to get caught up and like relate to these people with two, three, 400 grand a year incomes. But the reality is the average wage in Australia is what, 75, 80 grand. So, if you're earning 75, 80 grand and then losing 30 grand of that to the tax man, you're left with 50 grand trying to find that 8,000 a year to cover a negatively geared property. It can start to hurt and you can see why, such a large percentage of investors stop at that first property.
that's the beauty of property, right? If you look at the right data, you can find the right deals. Not every deal in Cairns North is going to be amazing. Not every deal is going to be like this, but you can find those. And you get a few of these over the years, or even 5 or 10 of these in these compound, right?
Yeah,
Like that's a
correct.
lot of positive cash flow coming your way. A lot of people say, I want to aim for 150, 200K, rental income by the time I retire in 30 years time or 25 years time. Well, maybe in 10 years time, you can achieve that by acquiring these type of properties,
Absolutely.
potentially, right?
Agreed.
Sean, it was really great catching up with you about this
Always
deal.
good, mate.
Yeah, looking forward to the next one in a couple of weeks' time. And I think for anyone watching, if you're enjoying these type of chats, feel free to obviously like, follow, give suggestions of areas maybe we can look into for you. But moving forward, every fortnight we'll talk about properties across Australia and these, deals to open up your mind to property investing. And if you're enjoying, hopefully you stick along for the ride.